And so we're raising money right now from family offices, and we just need a couple more family offices to come alongside this global project. So if you're listening and you are involved in a family office with philanthropic impact, it's a very exciting opportunity for us to start to scale in these, indigenous environments that are still close enough to their land where they can show us a model that functions as a bioregional ecologic economy, and then bring that back to the West and the North. And so we have envisioned the opportunity to start a sister city program, which I grew up with, sister city programs from, affluent areas of the United States out to Asia or Eastern Bloc Europe or Africa. And what we need to do is we need to reverse that. And so we need a sister city program where people are bringing us back into culture. The fundamental break is not just that rentals, the fundamental break is we can't imagine a culture where we are connected to nature. And forget about the food system. We can't remember what it feels like to be alive. We are all so numbed out, so distracted, so dysfunctional at the societal level, by and large, that we don't even dream dreams anymore. We don't dream what a different reality would look like.
Hello there. Welcome in. I'm Kimberly. This is Pretty Over 50, where we talk everything beauty, fitness, and lifestyle for the over 50 woman. I am so excited about today's video. We are talking with the fabulous Dr. Zach Bush, and that's coming up really soon. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you leave, and make sure you click that notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. And if you want all the good stuff, you might want to sign up for our Sunday morning email newsletter. The link is in the description box down below. Every Sunday morning, I send out a very short, very sweet, very free email newsletter featuring all the cool things I found throughout the week, whether it's a good piece of information, a funny story, a great recipe, whatever I would share with you if we are out together having coffee. That's what goes in the Sunday morning email newsletter. Truly, it is the most popular thing about my channel. It's super easy to sign up. You just click the link in the description box down below. Super free, super fun. I think you're going to love it. As I mentioned today, we're going to be having a conversation with the fabulous Dr. Zach Bush. And if you don't know who Dr. Zach Bush is, he is a triple board certified physician who has been spending the last decade at least focusing on the microbiome, the health of our soil, and the overall health of our population. He's doing fabulous work, and the way that I found him is through the Ion Biome gut support, which I've been taking for 5 years now. This is from a company called Intelligence of Nature, and you might not know that it's Dr. Zach Bush that is the creative spark that got this going. I've been taking Ion, for over 5 years now, and it really has done wonders for me. It solved my fluffy problem as far as my inflammation, my under eye bags, cleaned up my leaky gut system, and really got me back on track. And of all the products that I have recommended and highlighted on my channel over the last 5 years, this is the one that I get the most comments on. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe what a difference. I've had IBS for 10 years and now everything's fabulous. If you haven't tried that and you're thinking about it, we have a great special that the team at Ion put together because I'm doing this interview with Zach Bush. He probably doesn't know anything about it, but the team is really, really good. It's a great discount. All the details are in the description box down below. In addition, I want to let you know that the other product from Ion that I use is the skin support. This is what I use for sun mitigation. I use it all over my face, on my chest, on my arms, anything that's going to be in the sun for the day. This is what I use for the skin support. So this is a regular part of my skincare routine. If you haven't tried either one of these and you're interested, now's a really good time because it is a great discount. All the details are listed down below. I think you're absolutely going to be thrilled with the results. And with that, let's get on with the interview. I'd like to welcome in Dr. Zach Bush. Hi, Zach. How are you doing today?
Good to be with you, Kimberly. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm so excited to have this conversation. I have been talking about, of course, the Intelligence of Nature product line for a few years now. This is a great opportunity for me to touch base with you and find out what are you focused on today and what are you interested in today. However, before we get to that, I'd like to just do kind of an overview of where you think the state of health is for humans on the planet, and we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, it is an amazing few decades that we've all been witness to now, and it's something that was initially witnessed in the medical environment of certainly the halls of academic institutions and community hospitals, but then subsequently very obvious in every home in not just America, but now in the world, in that the chronic disease explosion that began in the 1990s has become something that is now 1 degree of separation from everybody. Every household has been directly affected or indirectly affected by 1 degree, relative or otherwise, of this collapse of biology that's expressing itself not just in humans actually, but across the entire planet as ecosystems fail and as we see more and more instability in biologic systems at the macro, the human systems are failing at the same rate. So right now where we stand is relatively intense moment. There was the announcements that came out around 2004, 2006 from a lot of the regulatory agencies in the United States warning that the generation born after year 2000 would be the first to be expected to live shorter than their parents for the first time in over 100 years. And so that was kind of a prophetic statement that ended up coming out of our Centers for Disease Control and the like, and that has now begun to really unfold. So the tipping point was definitely a couple times. There was 2012, big dip then, and then 2019, 2020 was a big shift, and then even a deeper shift, especially in males in the last 18 months or so. And so males of 25 to 55-year-old, previously healthy, have seen almost a 40x increase in mortality in what used to be a low risk category. So really, really explosive increases in death, not just morbidity. And so right now, males are, for the first time in decades, lagging more than 6 years behind women and life expectancy. We're down to, I think, somewhere around an average of 74 point something years now versus the female, they're around 80. So it's been a really, challenging, acute decline, steepest declines, between 2021, 2022. And so these are changes that I think, are harbingers of what is to come. And if it was just chronic disease and the prevalence or the shortness of life, 74 years versus 79 years, we probably wouldn't need to be too stressed out about, a demise of the species. But this has been paralleled by another collapse in our fertility in young peoples. And so is this failure of procreation that we are really facing as an extinction threat to our species. We now currently have, it was 1 in 3 males considered infertile by sperm count, but recent articles have been saying as high as 52% of males in the United States have now got sperm counts that are threatening fertility. And so as we look towards 2030 and 2035, we can start to see across the entire world a negative birth rate. And so if we're not hitting 2.1 births per individual on the planet, there starts to be a decline, and many countries are now well below 2. And that includes not just the West, but also Europe and Asia and South America, and recently in India. And on the back of every tuk-tuk in Mumbai traffic, there was a 1-800 number for in vitro fertilization. And so this is the severity of the condition that we're in now.
So when you look at the pattern of chronic disease, and of course the life expectancy is a concern, as well as the birth rate, but also the quality of life that we're seeing is definitely not what we would aspire to. What would you point to as the major factors creating this collapse in health and fertility on the planet?
Yeah, so when you see something that's this widespread, you can look to major fundamental building blocks of biology as a ground zero. This came across my radar in my own laboratories as far back as 2011, 2012. I was running my own clinic at the time that was a nutrition center for reversing chronic disease through food. And what we were witnessing was that a lot of our patients, even 2 years in, who were being extremely compliant with these really intense anti-inflammatory, plant-based diets, we're seeing an increase in inflammation. And so this drove us back to the drawing board to understand why 40 years of food science and nutrition science wasn't working. And that quickly led us to the realization that the medicine with the food had disappeared, and the food was now carrying poisons instead of medicine. And those toxins that were being carried were residues of herbicides that had been applied to soil and crop systems during their growing cycle. And the most prevalent of those is certainly glyphosate. We're now at 4 billion pounds a year of application of that single chemical globally, but unfortunately, it's still a small part of all of the herbicides that are sprayed on our food systems today, because Roundup, which is the most commonly known product to carry glyphosate as an active ingredient as a weed killer, Roundup became so prevalent in the American food system and agricultural systems that there was a widespread development of Roundup resistant weeds in farm fields throughout the Midwest. And that led to the need for multi-chemical herbicide treatment across farms and crop systems. And so the FDA, as far back as 2018 or so, approved three GMO seed combinations, where a single seed of corn or soybean could be genetically modified to handle not just glyphosate or Roundup, which was the typical Roundup Ready crop that was patented back in 1994 and really put into play in 1996 in a big way, with corn, soybean, and 30 other crops. Now we have Roundup 2,4-D, which is basically the Agent Orange chemical from the Vietnam War era. I think we've got dicamba in that mix, as well as some of the nicotinamides. I don't know if it's completed now, but I know that there's near completion of a 5-chemical seed that will be being grown throughout the Midwest soon as well. That includes a couple other of the more toxic, including a very old one that we had tried to get off the market back in the 1970s. And so we're seeing this just massive penetration of chemical management of food systems, which is trickling down not just into our soil, but unfortunately contaminated water systems. And with 4 billion pounds of a water-soluble molecule like glyphosate, it ends up going into every nook and cranny of the entire planetary cycle of water. So it can be found in fossil aquifers, it can be found in rainfall, air we breathe. In the United States, for now, 85% of the rain collected is detectable for glyphosate, 85% of the rainfall, the air we breathe. And so that is getting to a saturation point where all of biology is being threatened through these single pathways. And the pathway that we've studied the most is around the twofold process of energy production inside the cell, which is from mitochondria, which are small bacteria that live inside your cells. Each human cell has 200 or so mitochondria in there. If it's a nerve cell, like a brain cell, then it's 2,000 mitochondria per cell. And those small bacteria are very sensitive to the influence of even tiny amounts of glyphosate, so parts per billion, levels that you would find in typical drinking water or city water or food systems. Even at those levels, we're seeing a decrement in the ability of mitochondria to make energy. So what's really happening is the dimming of biology on the planet. Whether you're an earthworm, a bacteria in the soil, or a human, you're feeling the pressure of a decreased amount of energy at the cellular level. What this leads to is a reduction in cell repair, cell detox, cell motility in the case of something like a sperm. And so you're getting this decrement in light energy that the mitochondria are responsible for producing. And so that's probably, the foundation of it is the lights are going out. And then the second piece of that is really around this destruction of the barriers of the body. And this includes the gut barrier, which is composed of billions and billions of cells from, your mouth, nasal cavity, sinuses, all the way down through the upper GI tract, through the stomach, through the small intestine, through the colon. That entire system has a surface area the size of a tennis court. And so that massive surface area, composed of billions and billions of cells, functions as an intelligent gatekeeper of nutrient passaging, nutrient preparation, water absorption from the gut. As glyphosate and other residues start to enter the system, we've been able to demonstrate that the tight junctions that produce that single gatekeeper start to fall apart. And this leads to a leaky gut phenomenon. And you've experienced this in your own journey with ION and the rest, is that we are now starting to lack the very fundamental basis of biology as to how we maintain protein synthesis, protein production, protein organization, and protein folding into these complex structures that then protect the body, not just at the gut level, but also the blood-brain barrier, the vascular system, at the kidney tubules that do all of our detox. All of those systems rely on tight junction production. And so as those tight junctions are undermined in their ability to remain coherent, You get leaky gut, leaky brain, leaky kidneys. Across the board, your body is failing to compartmentalize the identity of its systems. And with that, you get complete immune system overwhelm. So decrement in mitochondrial function, the lights are dimming on biology on the planet due to herbicides and pesticides. Protein synthesis and protein function is declining. So enzyme function, protein barriers, all of that's decreasing. And then finally, this immune system overwhelm is the result. For that, we get chronic inflammation, chronic dysfunction throughout the body, leading to these diseases.
Yeah, and you can look around, particularly those of us who might be watching and they're a little bit older. We're now seeing things like peanut allergies, gluten allergies, chronic fatigue syndrome, things that we did not see in our lives as younger people. Let's talk about the buildup of these toxins in our environment, not just in the regular everyday, but in the areas that are farm producing areas. I know the mouth of the Mississippi has become an extremely toxic area. Let's talk a little bit about what happens when that starts building up in mass in different localities.
Yeah, this began my journey into, global advocacy for a different, food and agricultural system. Once we uncovered the relationships of glyphosate to the breaking of protein structures, inflammation pathways. My background was in chemotherapy development, so I studied cancer cells, and my area of expertise of cancer cells was actually mitochondria. And so I was developing chemotherapy specific to the mitochondria, or targeting the mitochondria of cancer cells. And when we started to uncover glyphosate, realized this was kind of ground zero of not just cancer, but really of the dysfunction of biology that leads to these chronic inflammatory states, that leads to, we can map it actually just by public health. And added these chemicals in 1976 to the American food system. By the early 1980s, we have an obesity epidemic. By the late 1980s, we have a type 2 diabetes epidemic starting to be identified. We wouldn't even dream at that point how bad that was going to get. But the red flags were going up. Early 1990s, we start to get red flags on new autoimmune dysfunction. The creation of the celiac disease phenomenon with the severe autoimmunity due to gluten sensitivity. Turns out our laboratory, one of our first peer-reviewed science articles that we published 10 years ago, was that's actually a glyphosate injury, not a gluten injury. When gluten carries glyphosate, you get this combined injury that leads to these deep immune dysfunctions. Thyroid dysfunction and autoimmune disease in other glands like the thyroid, the adrenals, the skin, etc., started to accelerate by the late 1990s. And then by the early 2000s, you see this explosion, obvious, of Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's in males, Alzheimer's in women, the advent of all the leukemias and lymphomas, late 1990s into 2006-8 timeframe. And so all of that was happening. And I got interested in what you're talking about is, well, I wonder if this maps not just as a country, but can we map it geographically to the amount of glyphosate used in the environment? And that led to the creation of the Farmer's Footprint storytelling and awareness vehicle, which is a nonprofit we started in 2019. Based on the filming 2017 and 18 along the Mississippi River. We started in Minnesota, went all the way to the headwaters of the Mississippi, or from the headwaters of Minnesota all the way to the mouth of the Mississippi down in New Orleans. And that 1,200-mile journey took us through ghost towns for that 1,000-mile journey. Literally every retail shop boarded up, every restaurant boarded up, bars boarded up. And while we were making that trip, the U.S. Postal Service was actually closing post offices all the way down. And so we were seeing not just the disease of the population at the biologic level, we were seeing the fundamental collapse of economy following that level of disease and failure of production of land, peoples, etc. And so this ghost town that we call the middle of America ends in the last 90 miles of the Mississippi between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And of course, there we see certainly depressed economies. But since that advent in 1996 of GMO crops that allowed us to logarithmically increase the amount of Roundup ending up in that river, we saw the explosion of cancer in that territory. And so this is now called Cancer Alley. It's the highest rates of cancer in the entire developed world. And as we went through that region, it was not unusual to find a farm family dealing with their 5th cancer just in mom and dad alone. And so it was just unbelievable, even for a cancer doc and, kind of chemotherapy guy. I just couldn't have conceived for that journey just how extreme this crisis has gotten in the middle of America. And as I've now traveled globally over the last 5 years to agricultural zones all over the world, the second big zone behind the Midwest to really adopt the large chemical agricultural systems of what was called the Green Revolution in the 1960s and 70s was Punjab, India. And there's actually something called the cancer train that runs out of Punjab. They don't have a large tertiary care cancer center in that entire area of the country, that state. And so they actually have a train that runs from the capital of Punjab to a neighboring place. And it's just a normal commuter, train or a domestic train system. But over the last, 10 years, they've seen this same explosion of cancer in Punjab, and it became termed the cancer train because on any given day that thing is traveling, 60% of the people on the train are going to get chemotherapy in the nearby state. And so this could not have been imagined, when we started the journey in the 1970s. And I don't think it was necessarily, known what was going to happen. I think even though we knew these chemicals were inherently harmful at some level of exposure biology, before we dreamed of genetically modified crops in which we could actually spray the actual food with these chemicals, it was just being used as a spot weed killer. And the amount of residues were extremely low in the 1970s. But as the usage started to ratchet up and 1991 debuted, we started spraying wheat directly with glyphosate as a desiccant rather than a weed agent. And so what a desiccant is, it basically accelerates the drying of a crop so it can be harvested quicker and a higher yield of harvest can be had, especially in northern climates where snow or early winter might be threatening the crop. And so this is when wheat suddenly was carrying extremely high levels of glyphosate. And unfortunately, that same practice now dominates the market of lentils and other legumes. The lentils and other parts of the food system have been blamed for lectins by one of my colleagues who thinks lectins is causing all this disease. The lectins have been an important part of our diet since the origin of time, just as wheat has, and the gluten. And so it's really the gluten and the lectins in these legumes and grains that are contaminated with very high levels of desiccants that utilize glyphosate as an active ingredient, that we end up seeing these biologic levels that are creating these massive dysfunctions of human immunity and the rest. So that's been a bit of our journey, I think unintentional originally, but with the success of these herbicides and pesticides, and with the increasing collapse labor on farms and the decreasing amount of revenue on farms, it demanded a scaling of size. So not 300 acres on a family farm, but at least 3,000 acres on a family farm, not managed by 3 generations, but managed by one aging generation. The average age of the farmers in the United States range from 59 in some areas to as high as 70 in some areas. So we've lost a generation or two of younger farmers as they have been trafficked out of the rural areas to get high paying or white collar jobs. We've completely undermined our complete knowledge of how to produce food within the country. Fortunately, there's a renaissance going on of that right now. We see more young people getting engaged in agricultural programs around the country than in probably 100 years as far as the percent increase. And so I think there is going to be a backlash to this collapse of productivity. And 2020 maybe was an accelerant to that change of mindset, because we saw seeds sold out of every grocery store and every hardware store in the country for a year. So there is a renaissance in it there that I'm very excited about. So as desperate as our path has been, it may have been the necessary journey for us to reclaim ultimately sovereignty, not just at the food level, but actually at the human health, which is really, say, human consciousness.
Right, exactly. I want to just take a little bit of a second to stop and really visit some common sense as far as our food supply. Since I have become aware of the glyphosate issue and the herbicides and pesticides used in our food supply, I've been screaming from the rooftops about Roundup. It's still in production, it's still being manufactured, it's still available in every store in this country. You have been screaming about it in a very nice way, and as well as legions of others who are really interested in true health, and yet nothing changes.
Yeah, it's been a really frustrating and almost bizarre journey, because our team has testified to the EPA in front of the Trump administration's EPA and Biden administration's EPA, and you can't get more polar opposite of the views of our presidents or their platforms, and yet these regulatory agencies continue to be untouched in their seeming approval of these things. And it's not just the United States. You see other countries trying to get glyphosate out of the system, and then industry moves in, creates a fear campaign, and then there's a backlash. And then you see Mexico, for example, backtracking on its goal to have a glyphosate-free country by 2025. They've just backed off on that just in the last couple months and said, well, we're not sure when we're going to be able to make it happen, but we're working on it, kind of thing. Europe, same kind of thing, where it was said that it was going to be successful. The only country that I'm aware of that's really going to succeed in this is Russia. And then that kind of backlash to the Western technologies has allowed them to see the opportunity to reclaim food systems. And so not just Russia, but also the Eastern Bloc countries that used to be part of the USSR were part of that movement. And Ukraine was certainly the breadbasket of the region by the time the war started there. Germany, for example, had many years previous stopped buying any grains from North America, including Canada. And that was because of their recognition of the amount of chemical residues in those foods were causing widespread health problems in their population. They then moved to the entire, organic system of Ukraine and parts of Russia. And you see this, change happen, perhaps part of the political matrix that led to a war there to kind of collapse things, because we actually are now rushing into Ukraine, and US private equity firms are buying up all their farmland. So whether by intent or certainly by result, what was the competitor to the US marketplace in Europe and in Eastern Europe there is now being co-opted by the systems that are putting these chemicals into play at large scale. So it's basically a financial / economic / kind of food system, functional economy, I would say. It's so interesting because you cannot solve this by telling farmers to stop spraying glyphosate. It just doesn't work, because they are involved in an economic system that has incentivized the use of these chemicals and genetically modified seeds for decades. And the pressure in the courts and otherwise, and probably most importantly, the pressure in the banks is keeping farmers from being able to make the right decisions for their land. You can't get a bank loan without USDA crop insurance in most circumstances. And the USDA won't crop insure regenerative organic crops because they say that, if you're not using these chemicals and herbicides, pesticides, you're a high risk for failure of crop, blah, blah, blah. And so with that, then the farmer can't get the loan for the inputs, the seed, the fertilizers, etc., that would be helping them make that transition. So it's important for us to zoom up to that macro economics level where there's an understood economic, military, industrial complex that's really tied up in all of this as much as farm fields and management of soil systems.
Yeah,
And
and
that's been a sobering reality for me, because when I started out in 2017, I was like, this is so simple. We just need to show farmers what's happening to the public's health, and we need to show the public what's happening to their health and show them why. And we can agree that farmers and consumers can change. And then you find out there's this whole system between those two realities that control the vast majority of the money. Farmers used to make, 60 cents on the dollar, or maybe it was 46 cents on the dollar of consumer dollars by the end of the 1960s. Today, it's 13 cents on every consumer dollar. And so we've gutted the profitability of the farm by putting all these middle systems and chemical relationships and chemical dependence into our farming systems, so that the chemical companies are walking away with most of the money that's borrowed from banks, and the only person on the line at risk is the farmer. So that's a tragedy on a deep level, but also the opportunity for the reinvention of the food system from the ground up.
yeah, and I want to get into that, but I do want to point out the insanity of supporting a system that was meant to nurture humans that is ultimately making them sick.
Yeah, and I think insanity would be the only definition if everybody understood it. So few people understand it, and this goes all the way up to our Senate and Congress, and certainly the executive branch completely clueless. But I've spent time on Capitol Hill. Our team has testified in front of the EPA, but I've spent an evening with 6 of our 100 US senators, all of whom were on the Ag Committee, 2 of whom were the chair of the Ag Committee and the chair of the Farm Bill Appropriations Committee. And here's these people have doled out over $1 trillion of funds through the Farm Bill over the last 20 years. And yet they had absolutely no idea about what glyphosate was doing to soil systems, biology at large, or anything. And so here's the people that are making the decisions at the governmental level, completely unawares. And ultimately, it's no wonder they're on lifelong political paths. Me as a doctor, I'm 0.1% of doctors that know anything about glyphosate. And so if the scientists have absolutely no idea, the doctors have no idea, probably unrealistic that our lawmakers that are putting together these incentive packages and subsidy programs, and the USDA crop insurance is part of that farm bill. And ironically, something like 80% of the farm bill is now going to safety net programs to get processed foods to people that can't afford food. And so, it's just like the whole thing is so upside down. But you can see that because the environment got so abstract in its value systems, it's inevitably resulted in an abstract food system, an abstract regulatory system, abstract policy system. And it's just time to begin again.
It's time to begin again. When I look back at my life, the person who probably tops the list of heroes in my life is my grandmother.
Mm.
My grandmother could plant a garden, tend the garden, harvest the garden, can the garden, cook the garden, raise the meat hens, process the meat hens, pluck the meat hens. And I spent many a day sitting on the back porch plucking chickens with my grandmother. She could do everything. We even had a neighbor down the street that grew worms, and we'd trade coffee grounds for worms. And that was the environment we lived in. The day that my grandmother walked into the house with a box of Bisquick, she was over the moon, because that box of Bisquick meant for her a couple of extra hours of freedom during the week, or she could do more ironing, or she could do more hand washing. That woman worked from morning till night to keep a family fed and clothed and this and that. What that has taught me, that enthusiasm she had for that Bisquick, is the seduction of convenience. And I look around at us as a civilization, particularly in the US and other Western countries, and it's almost as though we've been a little bit of a Pied Piper activity of marching us down the road of convenience, really in exchange for connection to the earth, connection to our existence here on the planet, to really getting our hands in the dirt and growing the food that we're going to be eating. And we're now in a situation where a lot of people wouldn't even know how to plant a seed or to harvest a piece of fruit, but they don't want to do it. They don't want to be involved in it. So I want to start taking a look at the systems that have been put in place that have led us to a place where our health is degenerating, our happiness is degenerating, we're losing hope, we're losing that spark of humanity. And maybe what you're saying is true, and I kind of see it too. There's going to be a pushback to where we're going to walk away from the systems that have really created such a poor level of health on the planet, not only in humans, but others. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so well said. And the story is so poignant. Your grandmother certainly came out of the World War II generation that was growing 40% of the food for the United States in backyard gardens. And that wasn't limited to the US. Same thing in the UK and other parts of the Allied forces. These were known as victory gardens, was the big marketing campaign for this. And so there had already been a trend pre-World War II for people to rely on the conveniences you're starting to talk about. Widespread refrigeration became available around World War II and really shifted the way in which we stopped fermenting our food. We were able to store food longer. And so we really got out of the daily necessity for creating our food, in the backyard. And in that, we began this journey into a loss of relationship with our food source that has, really accelerated in recent decades. We went from 40% with your grandmother's generation, providing 40% of the nutrients in her home from her backyard garden to now less than 0.01%. And so there's been a fundamental, complete and utter loss of that skill set and convenience, and I think, cost as well. So convenience slash, affordability of processed foods and processed, systems of consumer goods was paralleled by the food sciences that came out in the 1960s, even pioneered in the 1950s, but really perfected in the 1960s of what was the combination of fat, salt, sugar combinations, and then chemicals, things like pretty much every artificial sweetener you can think of, but high fructose corn syrup was a good example of it. But then the chemical sweeteners like aspartame and or NutraSweet and all of those that have come out over the years have all just been layering on top of this a very strange subsidized commodities market that no longer resembles food. And so it was the economic and lifestyle paralleled by food sciences that were addicting our brains. So why would anybody eat a Twinkie? They're not even something resembling food, and yet they trigger this fat, salt, sugar combination in the brain that's nigh on to cocaine. And so we get a cocaine surge matched with convenience, and now you're in it. Bisquick is quickly adopted because you're getting a neurochemical affirmation that you're doing the right thing by transitioning out of a couple hours of labor to produce something real. Those were some of the forces that came into play. And so I think it was not entirely social, but really programmed neurochemistry that was going on in our food sciences that far back. And I think nowadays it's just beyond refute how much money is being poured into every company out there as to how do we get customers addicted to our particular granola bar, or what it is. I have to go to McDonald's to find food science addiction. You're finding food science addiction in the entire matrix of the Natural Health Expo, that my company, tries to attend every year. Is just there's nothing natural in there, and there's nothing that should be called health in there, really. So the Natural Health Expo for the health food industry is a demonstration that these addictive marketing tactics of both the chemicals and the messaging of energy and the messaging of health and all these things have completely abstracted the whole industry.
Yeah. If it's got a commercial, don't eat it.
Probably true. That's probably true.
It's probably, I think it is true. So we really kind of laid bare the whole food production, food system in the US and other developed countries. I don't know if there's any country that really has been able to escape it. I know that Africa is even seeing a decline in birth rates. Let's talk about what you see, because I just know that you probably think about this all the time, because I know I think about it a good amount of the day. I can imagine you're even more so. Let's talk about what the solutions can be. Are we too far gone? Are we looking at an extinction event? I hear from the work that I do that humanity is going to make it. How do we fix this? What are you excited about? What do you see as some real opportunities for us to take back our food supply, take back our health, take back our connection to nature? I don't know anybody who would be out walking in the forest wishing they were in the office sitting under fluorescent lights in their little cubicle. That's where we really connect. So what do you see as the exciting things that you're looking at right now?
Yeah, so we launched Farmers Footprint, which was a global campaign for raising awareness of regenerative agriculture in 2018-19, and we've gained traction around the world with those conversations and the large scale storytelling that we've been allowing farmers to tell their story back to other farmers and to the public at large, rather than me as a scientist telling people the dangers of these things, because the stories of recovery and rebirth of farms and their soil systems and the nutrient density of their foods is so much more joyful and impactful ultimately, I hope, than the dismal state of affairs we've currently reached. And so I think positive storytelling is a really potent form of transformation. But as we've done that over the years, our teams have continued to morph into the realization that stories are only potent if they're part of a cultural renaissance. It can't just be the story. You need to develop a new culture. To do that, you need to develop that new mindset that you were just referencing, I think, which is we've got to solve this original wound that we are separate from nature. And this is all the way down to our language. You go to the Oxford English Dictionary, it defines nature as everything in the firmament of the earth, the minerals, the plants, the animals, as opposed to humans or anything humans have made. And so the fact that we see ourselves in such radical opposition to nature in the very definition of the concept, I think is really elucidates the depth of this wound, and this is where we must begin. And so for this, we've created a number of projects. One was called Renourish Studio, in which we're really trying to create an environment through the teachings of Carol Sanford and living systems as to how to executives and the stakeholders in finance and CPG companies and the food supply chain at large start to become part of the solution rather than the problem. And I think that's been a real joy to realize that the longer we spend making movies that damn some company or damn some, governmental agency, the longer it's going to take for us to get to the solution. Like, we have to sit down as a global community, recognize the depth of the wound biologically, psychospiritually, economically, etc., and just admit that, all right, we got to start again, and every stakeholder is going to need to be part of this new game, and we're going to have to play it all at once, because you can't change one piece of it. Like I said, you can't just change the toolbox the farmer's using in the soil management. You got to change the banks and the regulatory systems that make those bank loans happen, and goes on and on and on. So we got to bring all stakeholders together. And so globally, we have a mission called Project Biome, which is there to create the largest social movement in history very quickly by connecting the stakeholders. There's over 10 million nonprofits running globally now, and the vast majority of those are running in spaces of social or ecological recovery efforts. As you know, that everything's been heading south, and all of those metrics that those 10 million organizations are trying to address, largely because of a disconnect between their scale, their ability to storytell, their ability to measure impact accurately, their ability to mobilize monies effectively so that the scale of the change can happen. Many of them being very successful in small areas of local environments, but it's not trickling up to the whole. And so just the nonprofit area is in desperate need of some connective tissue. So Project Biome has been working primarily in Africa, which is the birth canal of biodiversity, running from about the east coast of South Africa all the way up to Egypt, is a zone that functions as the biologic birth canal for all biodiversity on the planet. It was the original bacteria, first fungi, first humans, all the way through a 4 billion history. This is where new life comes, and this is where the vast majority of the decorative plants that we use in our yards in North America originated somewhere along that birth canal. New flower species, new deciduous tree species, all of that. And so it's been really fascinating to go right to the birth environment of life on Earth and put into play some of these alternative ways of thinking. And so Project Biome is bringing all these stakeholders together in events, but also starting to allow for them to start organically creating an organism rather than organizations. When we create a single organism out of millions of nonprofits, we will right there have the largest social movement in history in this advocacy space. And as we bring governments, governmental funding together and everything else, we can bring this alignment that can radically change these systems almost overnight. And what we found that emerged in this very early in this journey is that if we are going to begin again, we have to begin in the most impoverished, most damaged spaces of the earth. And that's what we did in northern South Africa. And one of the projects that emerged from our work with one of the largest communities of 4 million people that have been displaced into a rural, deep poverty state with no running water, no sewage process, no waste management. And so they've desertified and poisoned, rivers and everything else just with the amount of trash coming out of these impoverished areas. And we started with a program called 10 Trees, and it's been really, really exciting to watch this thing just explode over the last 10 months. And what it basically recognized was that if we were able to train women to grow just 10 perennial food producing trees, bushes, or vines in their backyards in these tiny little, deep bush environments, we could have food sovereignty within those communities within just a couple years. And that food sovereignty would run for the next 7 generations. The cost of 10 little tree saplings is tiny. And the training only takes 3 weekends to train them how to make their own soil and compost, how to make their own watering systems and the like. And what we have seen is not just a revolution of the concept of food, but the revolution of leadership among these women. This particular community that we started in, 2,000 households, largely single women of children, raising children alone after exiting battered domestic violence environments in the greater community or from distant areas. And in just 10 months, 10% of those households have gone under the 10 tree program training. And before a single piece of fruit will develop on those trees, we've seen radical change in the community. These women are suddenly empowered to start their own little companies and start enterprise concepts and start talking to their neighbors for the first time. And this resilience and pride and this self-awareness has just been leaping out of this community. And these women are really showing us something that we just had absolutely no idea was going to happen, which is that when you create sovereignty at the level of relationship to nature, and nature becomes your partner, everything corrects. 40 generations of deep trauma in these familial lines suddenly seems to be erased in a matter of weeks, and their confidence level, they just look like different people, head high, chest held in confidence. They're out there with open hearts, sharing information, sharing seedlings. Everybody that comes in their yard, they want to give a seedling to, because they're like, this one, I got 2 in this pot, and you could have 1. And then this, like, it's a gifting economy is flowing out of the most depressed, the most socioeconomically vulnerable and threatened groups on the planet, just because they found their relationship back to nature. And so this gives me great hope that we are on a traffic path as a humanity to allow our old version of humans to go extinct. We must. We
We
have to
must.
stop the
Yeah.
genetic junk. We have too much genetic trauma accumulated in the current human to persist. And so we must die to that version of our human expression, and we must create a new version that begins at a trusting relationship without fear, guilt, and shame towards this relationship with nature itself. And for there, we're going to begin again.
Yeah, that's very exciting to me. That's exactly the kind of world that I would love to step into. You used a word that's a real hot button for me, and that is sovereignty. And what I have seen in the span of my life is humans in general giving away their sovereignty, giving away their power, giving away their control of their lives in favor of systems that really are not serving them in a way that's supporting humanity. How do you see putting together a program like 10 Trees for areas like, suburban Chicago or San Francisco? How do you see that applying around the world in different environments? And do you think it would be as effective?
Yeah, it's really a big question, and I think in our current environment, the answer is no, not at all. I don't think it's actually even possible in a lot of situations, because American urban environments are almost entirely rental situations, and in a rental situation where the security of your home is down to months, not years, there is no incentive and no sense of safety of planting 10 trees in your backyard, because you don't think you're going to live there in a few months. Your risk of eviction due to your next missed paycheck or whatever it is. The fragility of Americans' relationships to land is so unstable that I think that it is going to be a much different journey here. And so we're raising money right now from family offices, and we just need a couple more family offices to come alongside this global project. So if you're listening and you are involved in a family office with philanthropic impact, it's a very exciting opportunity for us to start to scale in these, indigenous environments that are still close enough to their land where they can show us a model that functions as a bioregional ecologic economy, and then bring that back to the West and the North. And so we have envisioned the opportunity to start a sister city program, which I grew up with, sister city programs from, affluent areas of the United States out to Asia or Eastern Bloc Europe or Africa. And what we need to do is we need to reverse that. And so we need a sister city program where people are bringing us back into culture. The fundamental break is not just that rentals. The fundamental break is we can't imagine a culture where we are connected to nature. Forget about the food system. We can't remember what it feels like to be alive. We are all so numbed out, so distracted, so dysfunctional at the societal level, by and large, that we don't even dream dreams anymore. We don't dream what a different reality would look like. We may yearn for that reality. We may desperately want a different future. But you hear a lot of people talking about they hope things work, they hope it gets better, they hope the next president changes things, whatever it is. And the reality is none of that's going to change. We've already proven that for decades. It's going to be healing these deep wounds and then rebirthing a culture that knows itself in the context of nature. And then we'll develop a different value system and therefore a different society that has a massive potential in the future. And we already have all of the know-how to make sure that there's no hungry child on the earth in the next 30 years. Now we can erase world hunger, world poverty, all of that through understanding what food sovereignty does at the individual level. It's a very simple journey. And ultimately it doesn't take much work is the interesting thing. This 10 tree program, like I said, 2 or 3 weekends of training and anybody can do this. And then it takes almost no maintenance once the trees are, off and running in the ground. And so you've got this journey of, food safety that really could begin the journey out of fight or flight state as humanity. So the Sister City program that we envision is I want people to feel what I get to feel when I go to the 10 tree program in rural South Africa, which is an enormous amount of hilarity and joy and laughter because there is so much dancing and music. You literally will build a compost pile with a group who've never made compost before. And as soon as the compost stack is made, somebody grabs a bucket, turns it upside down, gets an African rhythm going, and everybody's singing and doing line dances together and doing the thing all around the compost pile. And they're laughing and and then they sit down, they share food and they share stories. We don't remember how good it can feel to be alive.
Yeah.
We lost our culture because our culture became, disenfranchised from nature. And for that, we forgot how to create and how to express ourselves creatively. And so our creative expression right now is very monotonous. You can go to like your typical music festival to see this. The most liberated young people in the world are all wearing the identical festival clothes, and it's combat boots and some sort of skimpy outfit and a gold band around the arm, and every woman is now dressed like a goddess in the social norm. But nobody's ever looked worse than the way we look in these festival environments. So our most extreme like freedom spaces, it's so obvious we've utterly lost our creative individuality, and we no longer trust that we're special. We've forgotten that we are children of nature, and therefore we have a real deep failure of confidence. And for that, we stopped dreaming. And when humans disconnect from their curiosity and therefore their creativity, we stop being human. We simply become, something remembered rather than lived. And that's kind of what's happening is we're remembering at best a remembered reality, but unfortunately, very little time to even remember anything anymore. And we're just simply living somebody's abstract reality that's being fed to us.
Yeah, I agree with that. When I look at what's happening on the planet right now, and as a civilization, a collective that's living in a reality system, what I see is an enormous lesson on what not to do.
Yeah.
And 500, 1,000 years from now, as Earth has transitioned out of this into something hopefully new, healthier, better, more exciting, more energizing to the human spirit, we can really look at this knowledge base of we have done that, and this is the tragic results of those choices. And that's why we do it this way now. That's why we connect with the earth. That's why we stay small in communities. Those are the lessons that I think these really hard times are going to inform the generations that come much further down the road from us. So, one of the things I had someone on the show did an interview, and she was channeling a collective. And I asked the collective, do you enjoy working with Earth humans? Is this something that it's exciting for you? And they said, absolutely. However, it is tainted by what we see as a severe lack of hope in humanity. And boy, that hit me right in my heart space, Zach, because there are times where while I manage the day to day and follow that path of what feels good and what feels right and what sounds exciting, I can't say that I always have a lot of hope because it's hard for us to see an outcome that is nurturing, that is warm, that is loving, that is connecting from where we sit. How do you walk yourself through those times, and what can you share as we kind of start wrapping up? What do you see as useful activities, as useful challenges, as useful thought patterns that is going to help get us down a path that's going to nurture humanity instead of slowly killing it?
Yeah. Ultimately, the process is one of, stop doing and start being. And what that largely is experientially is the advent of the capacity to feel again. And so we have dumbed down the human experience down to thinking and emotions, all of which is very, I would say, low vibrational energy. The high vibration energies that come out of a human body are achieved when you suddenly ping something that you would call joy or love. These frequencies are multitudes higher, logarithmically higher than the frequencies of thinking or the frequencies of having an emotion. So the feeling of joy is much different than the emotion of happiness. Being happy is about a 7-second chemical event in the brain. But being in a state of joy is independent of what's going on in the day. You can have lots of stressors happening and all that, but if you're feeling that vibration of joy through your axis, you're grounded in that. And you can navigate, you can do the big wave surfing of emotions and stressors and whatever else, because you're actually feeling joy rather than having an emotion. And so the feelings are carrier waves, whether it be joy or a state of peace, unconditional love, grief. These are big waves that can carry us through ups and downs and tragedy and the rest. Whereas if we're looking for that next neurochemical hit, that drug effect of an emotion or that drug effect of, a quick, thought that relieves us of like, oh, maybe that's the solution. I was caught up in that solution minded. I got to fix everything for decades as a doctor, as a dad, as a husband, as a community member. It goes on and on. And I wore myself out completely. I had no more energy for life. It wasn't until I realized that I wasn't supposed to be doing anything. I was supposed to be experiencing life, which is to say, feeling what it felt like to be alive. And it was a long journey, 10 years of every day, changing my lifestyle, changing my practices, changing my thought, changing my language, changing the ways in which I was, fundamentally disempowering my biology, my psyche, my emotions, everything else, and moving towards this. And so out of that, we created an 8-week program called Journey of Intrinsic Health, which ultimately was the graduation of myself as a doctor and my entire medical clinic. We folded all that just a year and a half ago into the Journey of Intrinsic Health, which is an 8-week program that takes you through the 8 steps that I discovered in my own path of detoxing my original wounds and starting to heal something deep inside myself. And so I took a bit of a personal promise when I first started my clinic in 2010. This is after 17 years in academia and chemotherapy development and everything else. Was I was not going to do anything to any of my patients anymore that I wasn't willing to do to myself first. And what that quickly ruled out was any medications. Like I had never wanted a drug in my body, and I didn't take any medications, and I knew exactly why I wouldn't take any medications that I was prescribing to my patients. And so I had that conviction of like, what am I doing calling myself a healer? If I know that the very drugs I'm utilizing, I would never want in my own body. And so that kind of reversal of the paradigm became a really nice, measure for or metric for, am I on my right path or not? And it took me years and years to figure out what health practitioner would do, if not with a big biochemical toolbox of pharmacy. And the result was ultimately this 8-week program, which starts with the first module, which is B. And it is learning how to detox your mind and spirit from all of the artificial identities, all the external identities that you've taken on, often for good altruistic measures, but you've taken on external realities and therefore lost yourself. And so that first week is the most intense process of really uncovering source code, your original source, your original identity. And in that, we see healing begin almost immediately, because healing is ultimately a reconnection to the original design, the original math that you knit yourself together in your mother's womb with. There's no template in that womb. There's nothing in the womb saying, hey, you cell, go be a kidney cell. There's nothing inside the cell that we've found that determines what cell becomes what thing. And so this is a template that not only happens at the genetic level and expression of a kidney cell, it's a 3-dimensional journey where that cell now knows how to travel through vacuum space or the potential space of a womb to get to a location that will someday become a kidney. That is all held in the electromagnetic field, not in the biology. It's to say it's a physics event or geometry, biogeometry, rather than biology. And so that's what you get to carry around the rest of your life, is the original template. And so right now you are modulated, you are literally vibrating frequencies in and out of particle state every millionth of a second. Your body is disappearing and reappearing every millionth of a second. Every single cell, every single molecule, every single atom is going back into the invisible state of wave and then coming back into particle state to align to the original map. So why are you able to carry disease? It's because we've started to layer in unhealed human emotions for these vibrations that break genetic patterns of repair, because you're disconnecting the original math from the biologic expression. So what we're walking around with today is layers and layers and layers of divorce from the original design, because it wasn't just our lifetime that we carry, but the 40 generations before us. And so this is where we get to this inevitable death of something, because we have so much disease in the system. So that's the journey that we can now enter together. Is let's all go on this journey. You can do the 8-week course, but you can also just join the membership community and not take the coursework, because immersing yourself again in the culture of change is as important as going through the individual steps on your own personal health journey. As we vibrate at higher and higher frequencies, we get to act as tuning forks to one another. And the products that we're producing in the laboratory that you've experienced, these ion products, Intelligence of Nature was designed as a brand, understanding that nature is inherently intelligent for its diversity. And when you get back in touch with a biodiverse soil system, which is what these products carry, is the nutrients and the intelligence, or the communication network of ancient soil systems, as you come in touch with this communication system, all of your cells begin to recognize self. They recognize the original design, and we get to see healing happen in petri dishes, let alone in the beauty and the resilience of a human being. And so it's amazing to watch gut cells in a petri dish, completely divorced from the organism in which they originated, know how to build three-dimensional structures, know how to reconnect to that original design. And that to me is a profound lesson in the depth of the grace of nature and the mercy that she shares with us, is that we are so resilient that we will heal even if reduced to a petri dish. We will still access healing if given a little bit of opportunity to reconnect to the nature within us and around us.
Yeah, we are the life force power of the universe.
Indeed.
Yeah. Final thoughts?
Grateful. I feel really grateful to all of you for joining the conversation, and there's an opportunity for us to engage at a deep level together. I just finished a whole little Instagram live today with our Institute of Natural Law, which is one of the nonprofits that I've been blessed to co-create in recent years. And the Institute of Natural Law is really focused on how do we realign all human systems, whether it be our own household activities or governments or whatever, with natural law, which is to say biologic, processes of life. And the Institute of Natural Law is recognizing that we need to move from hope to manifestation. We can no longer hope for a future. We can't hope that we don't go extinct. We have to create the reality where we don't go extinct. And to create that reality, we need engagement. We need community at this grassroots level. So if you want to go to the Institute of Natural Law and get involved there, we've got a whole community platform there. If you want to get engaged at Farmers Footprint, get engaged with that large global community. We have an incredible, community and apps and all kinds of things there, storytelling on all kinds of levels. And then over Journey of Intrinsic Health, same thing, very engaging community, weekly events to keep you engaged, even if you're not taking the coursework, but just in the community. And so lots of ways to stay engaged and start creating with us, this future that we know is possible, because we can feel it. If
We can feel it.
if we
Yeah.
move to that state, then it does exist.
Yeah, and I'll have all that information listed in the description box down below, from the Instagram live to all the organizations. So easy, super easy for you to find. Dr. Zach Bush, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for the interview. Thanks for all you participating.
Yeah, thanks for watching. Bye now, everyone.